my first question, so IMF says in 2013 European banks will have to sell like around $3.8 assets, and the credit cutting loans, they are cutting the loans.
Yes.
So this will contract the economy more and more.
Yes.
So what is your evaluation on that, especially Europe and the banking system for the future?
Well, I've been predicting this for 2 years, and I've been very much against these Basel III capital requirements that require banks to recapitalize. And the idea, in theory, is that if you have banks with larger amounts of capital relative to their assets, that they're safer. And I don't have any problem with that, but you don't impose that kind of policy right in the middle of a recession, because the only way banks naturally can increase the relationship between capital and assets in reality is to shrink the assets and loans that they have outstanding. And if you do that, the broad measures of the money supply go down. And if the broad measures of money go down, the economy goes down. So it's just incredible to me that the IMF is like 2 years late. I've been writing articles about this almost every month for 2 years, and I'm not the only one. I mean, there are other people. For example, the former head of the IMF, Jacques de la Rosière, who's a good friend of mine in Paris, has been writing about the same thing. That this recapitalization of banks is insane in the middle of a crisis. So it's going to get worse. They have it right, finally.
Okay. And my second question is about Turkey. You just said in your speech that Turkey has agreed a demand bubble. Can you evaluate and give a little more details about this?
Well,
it's because of the central bank?
Yeah, the central bank has been too aggressive in allowing the money supply to increase in the last year, and I think this has allowed the economy to blow up what I call an aggregate demand bubble, in which the aggregate demand in the economy is just greater than any sustainable level. What I mean, sustainable at reasonable inflation rates. Of course, you can have a huge aggregate demand bubble, and you can have a huge amount of inflation going with it, but that's not a good policy. They would prefer to have lower or some moderate level of inflation, and to do that, you can't blow an aggregate demand bubble up. You have to keep the economy on course, and a moderate level of, or reasonable or sustainable level of aggregate demand growth. Now the aggregate demand growth is just way greater than can be sustained without having a lot more inflation.
What could be the effects of this bubble in the future for Turkey?
Well, I think the reason the current account surplus is so big is because of the aggregate demand bubble. And what does that mean? That means that Turkey has to borrow a lot of money to finance the current account deficit, and if anything goes wrong in Greece, in Europe, in Syria, in emerging markets in general, then Turkey is in trouble, because the foreign investors will not be as willing to loan money and finance the current account deficit. And that means, and I think there's a fairly good likelihood of this, that then the air comes out of the aggregate demand bubble quickly, and you don't want that. We know the air will eventually come out of the aggregate demand bubble, and it'll slow down. But the question is the air going to come out slowly and gradually, and not cause a lot of damage, or is it going to come out fast? And like the wind yesterday in Istanbul, cause a lot of trouble.
Okay. And for U.S. economy, you said that they are having growth recession for the moment. So how do you find the Fed's decision over the economy? And you said they are very bad for the inflation control.
Well, I think in general, I think the entire inflation targeting regime that in particular Chairman Bernanke is one of the pioneers in this whole field that is international. I mean, the herd is now on inflation targeting. Everyone is inflation targeting. I just think it's a very bad policy, and it led to the huge crisis that we had in 2009 because it looked like everything was fine. Inflation was growing at about 2.2% in the United States. So the inflation targeter said, everything's great. We're hitting the inflation target, but commodity prices from the end of 2002 until July of 2008, they were going up 17%. Housing prices going up 15% a year. Stock market prices almost 14% a year. None of these bubbles, price bubbles, was of any concern to the Fed because they were inflation targeting. For them, everything was fine. And on top of it, there was another thing going on, and that is the aggregate demand bubble itself. The nominal demand in the United States, they blew it up to it was growing at about 8%, a little over 8%, and the long-run trend rate of growth is about 5.4%. So that's just like the turkey thing, you see. They get the aggregate demand going too fast, and something has to give. In this case, in 2009, of course, the air came out quickly.
Okay, one more question. How do you see the commodity prices will be shaped this coming years, parallel to dollar and euro currencies? You said when dollar losing power, commodity prices going up. So how do you see this coming 3 years for commodity prices?
Well, it really depends a lot on your forecast of the dollar-euro rate. If the dollar is strong, let's go through the scenario. Let's say things get much worse in Europe. Everyone wants to get out of risky markets, so they get out of Turkey, out of Asia, out of Latin America, and what do? Where do they go? They go to New York. They go to U.S. Treasuries, safe securities. They go to the U.S. dollar. So the U.S. dollar gets very strong in that scenario, and commodity prices go down. And that's what happened, you see, with the Lehman crisis in September of 2008. That's exactly what happened. Really, the dollar was getting very strong. Oil prices were collapsing. Gold was collapsing. All the commodities were collapsing, and of course all the emerging markets were collapsing too because people were taking their money to safe places, and in that scenario you say, well, that's great, commodity prices would be lower, oil prices would be lower, that would be good for Turkey, but the problem is it's not quite so clear, because if everyone's taking their money to New York, they're taking it out of Turkey and other places to go to New York to be safe. So it's a bad thing if you have a big overhang of a current account surplus like Turkey does. Then it has to adjust very quickly. See, here's the thing in economics. Things can't go on forever. You can't have an aggregate demand bubble like they have in Turkey with the growth being what it was last year. It's not sustainable. It won't. We know it's not going to last forever. We know the current account deficit, it's not going to last forever. The question is the speed of the adjustment back to something normal. And my contention is that there are a lot of things with problems in Greece, Syria, and so forth that could make Turkey very vulnerable now, and a very rapid adjustment. And that's the problem. If it's rapid, then it kind of catches everyone by surprise. Again, I watched that windstorm come in Istanbul yesterday. I mean, I could see it right in front of my eyes from the Swiss hotel. I watched it come across, and it was like that, and everything is blown apart, everything's broken, and no one was on guard.